Picture this. A single square mile of downtown Tokyo is worth more than the entire state of California. The Imperial Palace grounds are just 1.3 square miles, yet they are valued higher than all the real estate in Canada. For a few surreal years in the late 1980s, this wasn't a fantasy, it was Japan's economic reality. A bubble so colossal, so detached from anything rational, that it still defies belief. This is the story of how Japan lost its mind to money and what happened when it woke up. Welcome to the Historical Audit, where we find the missing pieces behind history's greatest events. To understand the bubble, you have to understand what fueled it. Japan in the 1980s wasn't just thriving, it was conquering. Its cars dominated global markets. Its electronics were the world's standard. Trade surpluses with the U.S. were massive, and the yen was soaring under the 1985 Plaza Accord, which aimed to devalue the dollar. Japanese companies were buying iconic American assets like Rockefeller Center, Columbia Pictures, Pebble Beach Golf Course. But all that exported success created a tidal wave of cash flowing back home. And with limited domestic investment options and cultural aversion to overseas financial markets, that money had nowhere to go but into Japanese assets like stocks, especially land. Land in Japan was more than mere property, it was a national creed. On a mountainous archipelago where flat, habitable terrain was scarce, land wasn't just an asset, it was the ultimate store of value. It was a tangible anchor in a rapidly modernizing society. In the collective imagination, land did not depreciate, it could only ascend. Banks operated on this unshakable faith. They lent money based on rising land prices. That money was used to buy more land, which pushed prices up again. Higher prices meant more borrowing, and hence created a loop that kept inflating the bubble. It was a financial perpetual motion machine, powered by belief and enabled by easy credit. Then came the numbers. The numbers that followed were unbelievable. They were so crazy that they didn't make any sense. At the dizzying peak in 1991, the total value of Japanese real estate reached an estimated $20 trillion. To grasp the absurdity, that sum was roughly 4 times the value of all real estate in the United States at the time. All of this value was concentrated in a country with only 4% of America's landmass. The price of dirt in Tokyo, in other words, had eclipsed the value of every office tower, suburban home, and ranch from California to Maine. Have you ever seen an asset like crypto, a meme stock, a neighborhood becoming so overvalued that its price lost all connection to reality? If you have, you can pause the video and share it below in the comments. The bubble was sustained by a powerful national narrative. Japan had risen from atomic ashes to economic supremacy in just 40 years. The post-war Japanese miracle created a belief in exceptionalism, something that Japan had discovered as a new, superior form of capitalism. The old rules didn't apply. This psychology infected every level of society. Corporations borrowed billions to speculate in Zytec, which is also known as financial engineering, which led to people often earning more from playing the markets than from their core businesses like running their own factories or stores. Ordinary salarymen took out massive loans to buy apartments the size of parking spaces. They were convinced values would only go up. The banks lent with reckless abandon, assuming the government would never let the system fail. The clearest sign of the madness was something called the Tabashi scheme. It means to fly or to pass. Brokers would take a client's bad investment, a big loss, and quietly transfer it to another client's account to hide the failure. That way, no one ever had to admit they lost money. It created a fake reality where everyone looked like they were winning. The entire economy was engaged in a collective act of make-believe, where price was divorced from value, and wealth was just a number on a ledger. But bubbles need oxygen. Japan's was pumped by artificially low interest rates. The Bank of Japan, fearing a recession from the strong yen, kept rates near zero for years. Cheap money was gasoline on the speculative fire. All bubbles pop. Japan's began deflating not with a bang, but with a series of deliberate policy pinpricks. In 1989, the new governor of the Bank of Japan, Yasushi Mieno, looked at the insanity and decided to stop it. He sharply raised interest rates. He also imposed restrictive limits on bank lending for real estate speculation. The effect wasn't immediate, but it was terminal. The cost of carrying monstrous debt soared. New credit dried up. Without new, greater fools to buy at higher prices, the market stalled. Then it reversed. The collapse was slow motion and merciless. Land prices in major cities fell for 15 consecutive years. The Nikkei stock index, which had peaked at nearly 39,000 inches December 1989, lost 80% of its value over the next 2 decades. It still hasn't returned to that peak even after 35 years. The human and corporate toll was devastating. People who bought at the peak found themselves with mortgages worth far more than their collapsed homes, a phenomenon known as being underwater that would later plague the U.S. in 2008. Companies that had borrowed against inflated land values were crushed by debt. Banks sat on mountains of bad loans, creating a zombie banking system, too weak to lend to healthy businesses. This led to Japan's lost decade, which stretched into 2, then 3 decades of stagnation, deflation, and economic paralysis. Growth flatlined, innovation slowed. A generation entered a workforce of limited opportunity and learned to expect less. This is the real price of a bubble. Not the pop, but the paralysis that comes after. Where do you see a similar hangover today? An industry or economy struggling to move past a period of irrational excess? The aftermath is often longer and more painful than the boom. Japan's bubble wasn't just a national tragedy, it was a warning to the world. First, it demonstrated with terrifying clarity that asset prices can detach from reality for years, sustained by narrative, cheap money, and collective belief. Central bankers worldwide watched Japan's crash, and still repeated similar mistakes, most notably with the 2008 U.S. housing crisis, where home prices always go up became the new land never loses value. Second, it showed the perils of deflation. Once prices start falling, consumers delay purchases, businesses halt investment, and debt becomes heavier in real terms. Breaking this psychology is brutally difficult. Japan tried zero interest rates, quantitative easing, and massive fiscal spending. The policies that would later become global templates after 2008. Yet even all that brought only limited success. Third, it created a playbook for zombie economics. Keeping insolvent banks and companies alive to avoid short-term pain can lead to long-term economic sclerosis. Japan's reluctance to force drastic restructuring left its economy burdened and uncompetitive for years. Most hauntingly, Japan's experience asks a philosophical question: what is wealth? For a few years, Japan was, on paper, the richest nation on earth. But that wealth was a phantom, a number based on the assumed value of dirt and shares that produced nothing. When it vanished, it revealed that real wealth isn't valuation. It's productivity, innovation, and sustainable growth. Today, as we watch speculative frenzies in various assets, Japan's story is the ultimate cautionary tale. It reminds us that trees don't grow in the sky, that what goes up must come down, and that the higher the peak of irrational exuberance, the longer and deeper the valley of despair that follows. The audit of Japan's bubble reveals a painful truth. Sometimes the greatest economic threat isn't a crash, but a slow, silent deflation of hope and potential. Japan didn't just lose trillions in value, it lost a generation of dynamism. The land beneath the Imperial Palace is still there, but the belief that it was worth more than a continent, that ghost still haunts the global economy, whispering that this time is never different. If this audit made you reconsider the nature of value and speculation, hit subscribe, share with your friends, and join the audit.